So we're at the back of the scale shack where the meter socket is. And if we take a look, down near where the conduit comes in, there's a ground wire, and this is the same ground that's used for the panel inside it, the circuit breaker panel. We want to be tied to the same ground that we're using for utility company power. So although you can't see it, buried under the earth is another connection that goes from that same ground rod around the scale shack and out to the scale itself. So the wire from back at the meter socket actually comes up at this point, crosses the pad, comes up into the pocket where the J-box is, and is attached to the ground lug. So the first test we're going to do is to make sure that we have a good ground all the way out to the scale. And we're going to use the extension cord to verify that ground connection. So we're in the scale shack, and the first portion of our test is going to be the outlet where the indicator is plugged in. We're going to do a neutral to ground test. So we'll take the meter and set it for AC volts. We'll check between ground and neutral and see what kind of voltage we have. And we're looking for a reading that's less than 0.5 volts AC. It looks like we're 0.009, so we're very good. It gives us an idea of whether we have adequate ground at the outlet. The other tests are going to be out at the scale. And to do that, we need an extension cord long enough to reach from the outlet where the indicator is plugged into out to the scale. So we have 100 feet of extension cord, but we'll need to take a resistance measurement from one end of the cord to the other on the ground wire and write that value down so that we can reference it later. And it looks like we're getting a reading of about 0.5. So we'll note that so that we can use that for the rest of our tests. So at this point, we'll plug in the extension cord and we'll take the other end of it out to the scale. So we're out at the scale. We're going to need to be able to scrape paint to get a clean metal surface to be able to take our reading. And then we're going to check from the ground on the extension cord to that area where we scraped paint, and we're going to get a resistance reading. And we're going to write that down. And then after we subtract off the resistance of the extension cord, the result should be less than 1 ohm for a good reading. So the next test is to determine if we have a continuous ground from one end of the scale to the other. So we're going to take the extension cord and put the ground lug of the extension cord on that area where we scraped down to bare metal. And then we're going to need to go to the other end of the scale and make a test from the end of the extension cord to the scale frame itself. So we've moved out to the last module on the truck scale. We're still holding the ground connection at the first module. We need to take a resistance measurement out to the last module. So again, we might need to scrape paint to get down to bare metal. Once we have that, we'll check from the ground on the extension cord to the area where we scraped the paint. And once we get that reading, we subtract off the resistance of the extension cord, which is about 0.5, and that reading should be less than 1 ohm. We've removed the access cover. So here's the J-box, here's the ground wire coming in. There's also a ground wire that leads from that same stud into the J-box for the transient protection that's present in the box. Make sure that the connection is clean, that it isn't corroded, and it's tight. So we've opened up a pocket for where one of the load cell mounts is placed. And the last test that we need to do is to check the connection of the shunt from the top plate to the bottom plate. We're going to check from bottom plate to top plate. and we're getting a reading of 0.1 ohms, and again, this should be less than 1 ohm. So if we had problems in this area, we'd look for problems where it's connected or a corroded cable. And usually, if it's a problem at either end, we can simply take the connection loose, clean it up, put it back together, and retest. So if we have problems with our readings from module to module, it's usually the result of the straps that are in place so that we have a continuous ground. So we take a look at where the strap connects from the other module and where the strap connects to the next module. Usually we would just take the connection apart, clean it, put it back together, retorque it, and then check it. To be able to troubleshoot down to the point where we find the bad module, we can do the same test that we did before, except work our way back from the end of the scale until we find the module that has the high resistance reading, and then open up the pocket in that area, and then check the connection.